Okay, what is the candidate's desire to join an organization? So what kind of objective does that look like? Matching the right candidates based on the required skills with the right client. What's the culture? What's the environment? Transparency, right? So that's a very good objective, is for us to have utmost transparency with our clients and with our candidates so that we can execute an honest, successful experience. So some things to think about is, number one, we really want to have a balanced candidate evaluation. So making certain that an objective that we bring so that we can have a successful experience for our clients, for and with our clients and our candidates, is to make certain that we are providing that balanced evaluation. That can the candidate do the job? Do they have the capability to do the job? Do they, if they have the skills, that's to be expected. But do they have the capability? How good are they at what they say they do? What is their willingness to do the job, which is a separate matter altogether, and their availability to positively interact with their teams, with their management, with the peers, with subordinates. So how do we take a really balanced evaluation? So that's one really important objective of our hiring process for our clients, but also what our clients are thinking about, what's important for them as well. And then the second most important, and there's a lot of objectives, but these considered to be some of the most important is, and someone, I think had put this into the chat, is the candidate's willingness to join the organization. What is their desire to actually join that organization in the first place? Why? It goes back to the why are they looking for change? Does the candidate have a career wound? Does the candidate have a pain point? Does the candidate have the right motivation to actually want to join the organization, right? Is it legitimate? Is it genuine? And so when we're taking a look at this balanced approach, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's not rocket science. We take a balanced approach on our candidates evaluation, how we find them, how we source them to help select them. And then what is their reason? Why would they join this company? What does it bring to them? Whether it's a temp, contract, permanent, executive level search. And so we also want to be thinking around in terms of candidate sources. And because we're up against so many factors, because there's so many external factors that can impact the process for us and for our clients, again, money, time constraints, all those things we looked at. And because we want to make sure that we take a balanced approach, that we want to find candidates who truly want to join that organization for whatever their motivating factors are. We're up against those factors. We're up against all of our competition. We're up against so many things that come into play. But we also have to remember, and for a lot of us who've been in this industry for a while, we know, and some that are newer to us, and even those of us who've been in the industry for a while, it's often easy to become complacent and forgetting that the clients have their own sources as well. To never, ever assume that we're going to be the ones to find those candidates. That's why we have to work harder, we have to work faster, we have to hustle in this industry to make certain that we are bringing them the right sources at the right time and quickly. And so we never want to assume that, that they're not going to find somebody on their own. We want to expect that they're going to potentially fill and find their own candidates too. So again, why we need to always act fast. And we have to simply always ask, who do they have internally? If you're a 360 consultant and you're working on both sides of the fence and you're talking to the client, or if you're an account manager or business development dealing with a client, always asking, who else do they have internally? Never assume that they don't. If you're a recruiter in your role and you're partnered with somebody who's working with the clients as a recruiter, asking your partners, does the client have other sources? And companies have to move quickly if they hope to be successful in competing for the most sought after talent. And so what we're looking at is all the different ways that the clients are looking. So who is your main competitor, right? These are some of the things that we're thinking about, candidate sources from our clients. So who is your main competitor? And I don't mean other firms. We want to be thinking about internally. Who are our competitors? We're dealing with so much competition right now. We're dealing with the own HR departments and the internal recruiters. right? Promotions that a company may be planning on that we're not thinking about. Transfers, potentially moving people into different areas. Former employees bringing some back. Internal job boards, external job boards, employee referrals, previous applicants. So we're up against so much, and that's not even factoring in things like job postings externally on LinkedIn. It's not factoring in ZipRecruiter and all sorts of different platforms. It's not factoring in a variety of different factors. And so I wanted to ask all of you to type into chat, when you're thinking about this, how many times, right, you don't have to say like an actual number, but how often have you been caught off guard or potentially blindsided when the client has come back and said, we found somebody else, but you didn't realize that they were dealing with other factors. We thought we were the only ones working the search, until you get that email first thing on a Monday morning saying, thank you, your services are no longer required. Our other agency found a candidate, or somebody internally was promoted. So I'd like to see how many people have had that experience. Too often, happens once a month, quite a few, LOL, right? All too often we get that message. But at the operative here was that I said blindsided. Right? We were blindsided by that. We never want to be blindsided. It's still going to happen. It's happened to me more than once. It happens, but I know that they're using other sources. Excellent. So the point is not to assume that we're the only ones. We have to always ask. And again, some of us who are the most veteran in the group can get complacent sometimes, always asking, who else do you have? Where else are you working? Where are they coming from? Not just other recruiting firms. I'm not talking about other recruiting firms as our competition. I'm talking about all these other things that we don't ask enough about. Do you guys agree with that? We don't ask enough about where are all the sources you're looking for. So try to push for exclusivity. That is the supreme, 100%, says Stephanie. So let this just serve as a reminder. And if it needs to go in your job order forms or part of your job order process, to always ask these things, because we need to know exactly what we're dealing with so that we know how to manage our efforts. So now we'll go back to, we know what recruitment is. It's the process of sourcing and finding, and then selection, we'll get a little bit more into that. How do we make the selection process? How do we help the clients? How do we give that reassurance that we're finding the best possible people that are out there? And so on one hand, we're in a bit of a dichotomy. I was going to say there's no such thing as going too fast. However, we also don't want to go too slow. And so we're in that dichotomy. And sorry, what I meant to say is there is such a thing as going too fast. And that's where the dichotomy lies. We have to hustle. We have to move fast. We're up against so many things that we need to get the right candidate in first, make sure our candidates get that timestamp so that there are candidates, but we want them to be the right candidates. And so sometimes you can go too quickly and just throw a bunch of resumes at a client in the hope that one of our candidates might stick. But by doing that, you're compromising the integrity of the entire process by making mistakes or costly oversights. And as the old adage goes, you can't choose between doing it fast or doing it well. You have to do it both fast and well. So you need to have a well-defined process, and you need to have clarity and really understanding where you stand, where we stand when it comes to the client's process, where they're at, who they've already seen, who else they're working with, what's the timeline, how much investment goes into one job over another job. If they have 10 firms working on it and it's posted everywhere and they're promoting internally, and well, maybe your time is spent on other ones that you have a greater chance of success. So thinking about how do we do it fast, but how to do it well. So we're going to take a look at different steps in the process. And as I said, a lot of this might be reminders, might be new, might be just totally old news. So let's take a look at that job order intake. as a first step. What does that look like from the beginning? Number two, sourcing and finding the candidates. Where are we looking? Are we looking everywhere? Are we uncovering everything we possibly can? What does that interviewing and candidate selection process look like? And then a very, very, very brief note on testing and references. So we're going to take a look at first at the job order intake. And when we're thinking about what needs to happen first, obviously, understand what the job is. Now, I'm going to ask in chat again, how often, I'm going to drag you guys over to my 3 screens happening here. So how frequent is it in today's world and environment of recruiting that your client says to you, I do not have time to meet with you. Here's the job description. Here's the pay rate, or here's the salary. Now go. How often? Too often. Okay. All the time. I love the honesty here, right? All the time. Clients say, don't have time. Here's the job description. Go for it. Okay. All I've ever had. You have to make time all the time. You have to make time. Okay. So how do we get over that? How do we try to overcome this? How do we try to overcome this? And we'll talk a little bit about this, to be honest with them, right? Be honest with them. What happens, and I might be jumping ahead here, this is a topic I am wildly passionate about, is that job intake process. It sets the course for the entire process. It's about knowing their needs and not wasting anyone's time. Okay, so let's take a look at where we go with here. So when it comes to the job order, what's the purpose to begin with, right? A well-qualified job order is going to provide us with those greater opportunities to actually fill a role. Part of taking a job order requires us to make sure we understand the job so that we can find candidates who are a good match. Now, in your opinion, and everyone will have a different opinion based on the type of desk that you run, whether it's a temp desk, perm desk, whether you literally are working on a desk where you place somebody and they show up like the next morning, whether you have where it's more of a 6-week process, and everything in between. How long, this is just more out of curiosity and interest, how long does your average job intake meeting or call take? How much time are you given, I should say, when you're given the time? How much time are you given? 30 minutes? 30, okay, those are good. So 30 hours. Natalia's got 30 hours, but I know she meant 30 minutes, 1 hour. So these are what the clients are actually giving you right now, which is fantastic. For me, my job order intake when I was running a very busy desk was usually around 45 minutes to an hour. I'm hearing from so many individuals that we're lucky if we get 10 minutes. And so to see that some of you are getting 30, 40 minutes, an hour, that's great. How many are given literally 5 to 10 minutes and the client, and that's all they'll give us? How many get just the 5 to 10 minutes and that's all the clients will give? I do. Okay. Who else? How many? We've got 20 people on the call, so let's see how many people are willing to share how often. 5, 15 to 20 minutes, some hour, depending on the client. We have some clients that will only give info or email and do no intake call. Oftentimes it leads to follow-up emails and calls though. Okay, so let's take a look at things that we want to be thinking about. And really, we can only do what we can do. We can do the very best that we can in terms of trying to encourage the client and explaining to the client the purpose of the job order, and to being able to go back and explain to them that from a time perspective, by not giving us the time up front, there's a lot of issues and errors that can come into play. Our job is not just to send you a bunch of resumes and hope you find the right one. Number one, that's a waste of our time. That's a waste of your time, where that time could be better spent giving us, let's say, 20 minutes to understand the job, to understand the organization, to understand what it's going to take to land the right person, to understand some of the nuances, to understand how we're going to find a good candidate and get them to want to come to your organization. Again, our job client is not just to bring anyone to you. It's to bring people to you that want to be in your organization, that are the right fit. But without having the right information, it's a shot in the dark. And so really being able to explain to that client the nature and the criticality of having this meeting is going to mitigate that back and forth. It's going to mitigate the emails back and forth. It's going to mitigate the playing phone tag and email tag. And it's also going to mitigate you interviewing a bunch of our candidates who later on you'll be dissatisfied with. And so it's giving them a little bit of that education. And that's what this is all about, is educating the client on the critical nature of this part of the process, because it's the only way that we're really going to be able to go out there and figure out, number one, what is our recruitment process for this role going to look like? So how are we going to approach the market? How are we going to sell the opportunity? And then number two, the selection part. So one is the recruiting strategy, right? Where are we going? How are we finding them? Where are they hiding? Are they at your competitors? What associations might they be at? And then number two, how do we select, of all the candidates we find from our recruitment sources, which are the top 3 candidates that are going to be put in front of you? And without that, it's a guessing game. And so when we're thinking about educating the client, why an email doesn't work enough, and we might get some success to that, but it's not going to be enough. And so why a 5-minute job, or why just a job description? It's not always enough. And the poorly qualified job, and again, it's our job to educate the client, it is the major contributing factor to failure for recruitment consultants. And again, back to one of our earlier slides, our job is to be able to work successfully with these internal, the corporate recruiters, internal recruiters, the HR managers, the hiring managers, is to be able to execute a successful placement process for them. But without the upfront information, that poorly qualified job is just going to lead more often than not to recruitment failure. And so what would happen if we had recruitment failure? What will happen in that instance, right? There's so many things. Well, some of the things that we're not going to understand is, well, what will the candidate be expected to do, right? These are the things that we need from a job order so that we don't have that failure. What does the candidate expected to do? What's their job actually going to look like? What is the client looking for? What do they really want? What is that true candidate profile, right? Just because they want someone that's a executive assistant, one executive assistant might have a different level of responsibility or experience than the next executive assistant. What do we need to know about the company itself, about the job site, about the environment, about the location, about the hiring team, about the people that they're working with? How do we get them the right person? Where are they going to be working? What is the working conditions like? Right? These are just examples. What salary is available? What pay rate? What hourly rate? Right? What else can a candidate expect? How quickly do they need to find someone? What's that urgency? Well, when they say I needed somebody yesterday, well, does that actually mean you needed somebody yesterday? If we bring you 5 candidates by the end of this week, it's today, Wednesday. If we bring you 5 candidates by Friday, are you willing to interview them all by Monday or Tuesday next week? Well, no, that's too much time. Okay, well then how urgent is it? And then the commitment. How committed is the client to us? Are they willing to give us the time? Are they showing us commitment? If the client's not willing to give us time, how committed are they? Maybe they are very committed, but how committed? At the end of the day, what is that true commitment actually looking like? So the things that we're trying to explore from this job order, and again, some of this can be done in 20 minutes, but can all this be done in 5 minutes or just by an email? Not a chance. It's super unlikely. We're going to be spinning our wheels. We're going to be throwing resumes against the wall and hoping that one sticks. And then the client's going to be dissatisfied. And there's nothing worse than getting that phone call or that email saying, we're not satisfied with your services, we're moving to another firm, right? So do you guys agree with what I'm saying here? I know I'm probably preaching to the choir, but These are the educational things that we need to be reminding our clients on the criticality. If there's one meeting that's the most important conversation that we're ever going to have with the client, it's going to be this one. Do you guys agree with that? And you can use your emojis or type into chat. I just want to hear if everyone agrees to this effect, that this is probably the most important step of this entire process. Yes, 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 totally. Okay. And so if you're a recruiter and you're working as a part of a team, and you might be on that call with the client, or you may not be on the call with the client. If you're a recruiter and you don't have some of this information, what can happen? What has been your experience if you're one who's trying to find and work with candidates and you don't have this information? What tends to happen? You're setting people up for failure, not just ourselves, not just the client, but our candidates too, right? How do we prepare them to meet with the client? How do we get them excited enough to say, sure, I'll leave my current safety of my current job and go to your client. Sure, I'll turn down that contract for that contract, right? So without that, we're spinning our wheels and spending a lot of time. So again, I will get off my soapbox, but it's just, I wanted to put that almost always have to follow up questions from candidates, likely sending the wrong profiles because of missing information, shooting in the dark. The more facts we have, the better. Okay, so it goes back to education, education, education. And so let's think about some other things that a solid job order may include. Those were all just the basics, and everyone's going to have a different job order form or different types of questions that you may have. I'm a gigantic believer in all forms, everything. It's like the checklist manifesto. If you don't have it on the checklist, you're not going to ask the question. And that's where things can fall apart, right? It could just take one small thing for a job order to fall apart. So if you don't have it, chances are it might get missed. So I'm a firm believer of that. And again, it might be a very elaborate one for those of you that haven't get an hour with your clients. It may be really short and to the point and getting to the must-haves and the nice-to-haves if you have only the ability to have shorter ones. But a solid job order can include a variety of other things. So it can include things around what are their performance standards, what are their expectations, what are the KPIs that they're measured against. Again, these are just examples. What are their working policies? Do they have COVID protocol still in place? You know, hours, term length, start dates, those are the obvious. Information about the knowledge and the skills and the abilities and other. So what is the knowledge that they expect the candidates to have? What are the skills? What are their abilities that are required so that we can measure in that selection process against those KSAOs? Where to locate the right candidate? Sometimes, yes, we want to be the experts and we need to be the experts in understanding these things. But sometimes when you're truly working on that purple squirrel candidate search, and it's like okay, well, sometimes the client is the one that really understands, well, this is where you might locate them. These are our competitors. These are the companies we'd love to find candidates from. These are the companies we don't want to find candidates from. There might be, you know, here's some of the different industry associations that they might be involved with. Right? Here are some of the groups on LinkedIn they might be connected to. So sometimes it's about where to locate them to ask some of those questions, right? Again, what do they offer as an organization? Not just the income and the salary, because those are the basics, but what about the benefits? Sometimes it's not enough for a candidate to say, yes, there's a benefits plan. Like, okay, well, that's sort of bare minimum if they're a full-time permanent employment candidate. What about their culture? What about if they're a temp in a temp role? How do they fit into that culture, right? Are there perks and benefits for the temps as well? Do they feel like they're part of the team, or do they feel like they're on an island, right? What does that look like? How do you stretch the job order? Does everybody understand the concept of stretching the job order? And if you do, give me an example of what stretching the job order might look like. Wait to see if there's any responses in chat here. What could stretching the job order look like? And what does that mean? And again, something that's hard to do just via email, meaning more details, more money, asking for concessions. Okay, right? So that's a good way of saying it. It's asking for concessions. So if we have a candidate that has 3 years experience, not 7 years experience, but they're at the top of their game and they're highly sought after and so on and so on and so forth, do we not bring them to you? Well, 3 years versus 7 years is a bit of a stretch. What about 5 years? Yes, bring them to us at 5 years. Well, you say they must have a university degree. What if they have a college diploma? Sure, right? Well, you say that they have, the base salary is $70,000. If we find you that stellar candidate who's at $85,000, do you not want to hear about him? No, we want to hear about him. So stretching that job order and other potential needs as somebody has listed. What should a candidate, again, why should a candidate join the company? What are the issues with the company? We're excellent at asking our clients all of the benefits and the culture and all the nice stuff about the company. But what about the issues? And one of the questions I often ask clients is, what are we going to encounter when we engage the market? When we're engaging the candidate market, what should we be aware of? What are some of the issues within the organization? What are some of the challenges that others may be aware of, that we should be aware of, that we can disclose? How do we set search expectations? We could just do a whole session alone on setting job order expectations, but setting search expectations, really owning that process, being that project or process manager and setting expectations is crucial. Again, very difficult to do if we're not live with the client. So what are some of the sources of information, right? If we don't have all this information, if we don't get all that time, that would be in a perfect world. And because we're in a less than perfect world, we're not always going to get all the information that we would love to get. And so if you don't have all this information, what are other sources of additional information that we can draw upon to at least try to fill in some of the gaps? And again, I welcome anyone to come online and chat or type it into chat. So if you're limited and you don't have the things that you need, we don't have all the information, how do we really find the candidates? Where do we find them? How do we engage them? How do we sell the opportunity to them? How do we really kind of create a good story for these candidates to say, yes, I'm interested in that role? And to find the right candidates for the clients to say, yes, we want to interview your candidates. What other sources can we tap into or start getting creative to at least fill in some of those gaps for ourselves? LinkedIn, CRM, right? So go into LinkedIn. What have they got on there on LinkedIn? What kind of posts? Maybe getting some referrals. In the CRM, what's the history that we've had with that organization? What other roles have we done? What's some of the information we know there? Where else can we find information to help us create a fuller job order? Any other thoughts? Glassdoor, looking for reviews. Okay, excellent. So keep brainstorming, but here's some, right? So CRM, what's already in your CRM? Right? What searches have you done in the past? What communication has happened, if there is? Google, right? Google the heck out of the company. What's in the news? What are they about? What's on their website? Glassdoor, right? What are some of the feedback? Now, keeping in mind that a lot of people tend to go onto Glassdoor often if they're disgruntled. So take that with a grain of salt. Candidate intel, right? What some of our candidates that have worked with those companies. What do our candidates know? What's on LinkedIn? What about social media? How about the job description itself to try to disseminate some of the information? And so sometimes there is going to be some assumptions made. Sometimes it's going to be looking at what's happening in industry associations. Is there anything on an association website about that organization? Maybe something that's in the news, something at trade shows, whole variety of things that we can be looking at. So again, step one is doing the best that we can to get as much information that we can possibly get to get a full job order. Because without that, step two gets really tricky. And somebody put here, recruiting from clients that are in a downturn and getting candidates is provided. Yeah, okay, that's awesome. And so we're always wanting to think about, number one, sourcing for candidates for our active jobs. But a question I want to ask that might seem really obvious or too obvious of a question is, why do we need to always source for new candidates? Not just recycling the ones that are in our CRM, but why do we always want to think about sourcing for new candidates? And I know that seems so obvious of a question, but why? Why is this important to constantly be sourcing for new candidates? Builds a strong pipelining, current pipeline, becoming stale. So while you're thinking about your response to this, let me also ask you this question. How many times have you said to yourself, or have you heard colleagues in your company or in your industry who have simply stated, I don't have time to proactively source. I don't have time to proactively source. Meaning, I'm sourcing candidates before I think I will ever need them. So what's happening is it's always reactive. I'm only sourcing for the jobs that are coming in because I'm working on a reactive basis versus I'm proactively finding candidates. So how often have you felt that way? And that's okay. There's no right or wrong. But how often have you felt, I just simply don't have time? Or you've heard people say, I don't proactively source. I'm constantly in reactive mode all the time. Okay. What else? Anyone else agree with that? Many consultants have stated that they simply don't have time to truly prioritize sourcing. So you end up working with the best of who you find the fastest. Right? I'm finding only the best who I can find the fastest. So this can work well, right? This could work well. I'm just reactively, I'm finding the best of the best of who I can find in a quick period of time. But this isn't going to always work in our favor, right? So if we're scrambling and I'm finding the best that I can, I'm not finding the best of the best, then what about those clients who are pickier than you're used to? What about those clients that are really looking for a purple squirrel? And so we want to think about, how do I shave off some time in my day? Maybe it's not every day, but how do we shave off the parts of your day that can be used for higher impact tasks, right? The key is to get candidates in and then out to clients fast, but not just any candidate, because anybody can send any resume to a client. That's easy. Like, that is super easy, just to send a bunch of resumes to a client. Not a lot of strategy involved there. But finding the best candidates so that the clients actually get back to you and say, when can we set up that interview? That's skill, that's strategy. So if we're only scrambling to send them the fastest of who apply to us, or the first person that comes to mind, so we need to think about, in our busy lives with all the things that we need to do, how do we shave off time in our week so that we can not waste time on the busy stuff and find time on the stuff that's going to lead to placements, which is our candidates. Without the right candidates, there's no placements. We can bring in all the jobs that we want to bring in, no problem. Well, I know it's easier said than done. We can bring in jobs, right, and keep bring them in, but no candidates, no placement. Simple as that. So we want to think about, how can I shave off time each day? Someone says, don't take a lunch. Well, no, you do need to take a lunch. You do need to refuel. You do need to re-energize so you can put the time in. But really think about it. And this isn't a session on time management, so we're not going to really go there. But what you want to think about is, what can I do every day to actually move my business forward? And at the start of every day, ask yourself, what do I need to do today to move my desk forward? And at the end of the day, ask yourself, did I do the things today to move my business forward? If the answer is no, then we need to figure out what you need to stop doing so that you can find time to proactively find candidates so that you have them at the ready while you're also reactively finding candidates. So the sources of candidates, so building and maintaining a candidate database that evolves and becomes self-sustaining is the sum of a recruiter's worth, right? At the end of the day, we want to make sure that an evolving and maintaining and self-sustaining, quote unquote, database of top candidates is, I shouldn't say, it's not our worth. It's what our clients need from us is top candidates. So a strong, positive, and trusting relationship with your candidates will result in referrals and other marketable candidates. So however you find your candidates, having that relationship is critical to get your candidates at times doing the work for you by sending referrals as well and giving them a good experience. So let's take a look at the selection criteria. And first, again, we need to know what the selection criteria is to accurately source the right candidates. Again, and we do that through the job intake, the best that we can. We do that so that we can determine what is this candidate measuring like against the other candidates. So the selection criteria is, again, to help identify those job seekers who meet the minimum required qualifications. And so we want to be able to eventually get it to be past the minimum. We want to have the selection criteria is what even just makes them an applicant, like somebody that's even a contender. Then we want to think about the preferred and the desired and the additional criteria, the cherry on top, so the nice to haves. But what are those must have criteria? And then what are the nice to haves? And some people will use a bit of a chart or some type of a grid or a matrix to help them systematically compare candidates' resumes, whether they're actually physically creating something like this or there's something that it's just kind of more of a mental note. But I'm wondering, you know, a lot of our clients and a lot of those in the HR departments, they use a matrix. They're simply using a matrix and they're gridding the candidates that they're looking at compared to the other candidate and then making their assessment based on that. Not all the time, depending on the size and the scope of within an HR department and realm that you might be working within. But they're using some sort of measuring tool so that they should be, so that the selection is unbiased, so that it's measuring each person, so it's apples to apples comparison based on a set level of criteria. And so then it doesn't become subjective and it makes the screening process more objective. How many here actually use a matrix or that you're thought about or something to help you really decipher which is the best candidate? And it's okay, a lot of people don't, but this is just something that we're sharing because, again, a lot of HR departments do it and some firms do like to use something like this, especially when you're in that lucky, rare situation where you might have 6 candidates and you need to narrow it down to 3. Which 3 get exposure to the client? Does anyone use some sort of chart like this or some sort of measuring criteria to help you identify which are the top candidates who get submitted? And sometimes we don't have the time. You got to just send them as you meet them, right? Which is totally understandable too. Anyone use a selection criteria tool like this? Anyone? Okay. Government bids may require this. Yep. And I know certainly a lot of the clients that we've worked with in the IT sector, they've required something like this. They just want to know the skills. So give me the skill list, right? So what are the skills and which candidate has that skill compared to the other? So in some cases, this will be something that helps with a selection criteria. And so when we're thinking about again, there's lots of different handy tools and a variety of different things that we can be thinking about to help us understand what are the best candidates. How do we decipher which ones get in front of our client? Again, because our job isn't just to send anybody, it's to send the best of who we found. And so the best of the best, hopefully. But we want to think about is there are so many mistakes that we can make when it comes to sourcing. And again, I want this to be really interactive, and I'd love to hear from everybody. If you were to think about what are some of the mistakes that recruiters tend to make? What are some of the sourcing mistakes that recruiters tend to make? What could they be? Right. And because we have so many tools online and resources at our disposal, one might think that sourcing candidates for a particular position is easier today than it was in prior decades. I know from when I started, literally probably using Yellow Pages and a phone book, and a little bit of the Google was happening, but not as much in terms of the accessibility that we have today. That LinkedIn didn't exist when I started as a recruiter. However, according to veteran recruiters, the task of effective sourcing is still daunting, even with the treasure trove of information at our fingertips. It's still daunting. And there is no single best method, but there are mistakes that can be made. Okay, so not completing references, unable to understand the mandate, not asking the right questions, not completing back checks, social media checks. Okay, so those are all. Not having a strategy, a sourcing plan, time management plan in place. Being in too much of a hurry, too much information, not completing reference checks. That is a big one. If anyone has taken the ethics module so far, you'll learn that. Not asking if they've applied to the roles directly recently. Well, that one is a clincher. How many times have we had that happen where we've had a candidate that had already applied and interviewed but failed to remind us, and we failed to ask? Quite frankly, it's because we didn't ask. Excellent. Okay, so there's other things. Sometimes it's not the ones that are as obvious, right? All of your suggestions are amazing, but sometimes it's not the obvious mistakes that we're making assumptions sometimes about the candidates that you've never met. So too often, right, recruiters will write to a potential candidate, whether it's on LinkedIn or you're responding to an email, but you're sending a standard blurb that we've cut and pasted into our in-mails. And that might sound like, I've got the most amazing job for you that I know you're going to love. How many of us have sent messages like that? Probably all of us, if we're being real. How many of us have reached out to a candidate on LinkedIn and said, I've got the best job for you. Are you interested in looking for change? But what's wrong with that is that when you approach a candidate with this attitude, we're assuming something about somebody that we really know nothing about. How do we know that it's a job that we're going to love? How do we know it's an amazing job for them? The truth is we have no idea what they're going to like or not like. And you risk losing any possible trust that has been given otherwise, because we're just going to be seen as another recruiter. And so we want to be thinking about why doing that could be to our own detriment. It might feel faster. It might be like, okay, I'm going to find everybody on Recruiter LinkedIn. I'm going to send them all the same template message, and I'm going to hope for the best. And then you're like, well, how come I didn't get any responses back? How come it was a 50? Only 2 responded? Because we're not speaking directly to them. We're not addressing them and what potentially would matter to them. So that's one mistake that we often make because we're rushing. How about the next one? Is discounting active job seekers. Now, this is kind of old school, and I don't think this one fits as much today as it did. However, there is still that bias of discounting active job seekers. Okay, just got a message to let somebody in. Okay, thank you. Teresa has now been admitted in. Thank you. So discounting active job seekers. When I started 20 years ago, I was told to discount an active job seeker and only headhunt new people. So I became an excellent headhunter. because I rarely interviewed anyone who ever applied to me. Rarely. I only headhunted. So that's great. I was a headhunting machine. But then when I started to realize, well, just because someone's actively looking, we shouldn't discount them. And so many recruiters today believe that only those passive job seekers are desirable, depending on the desk that we're in. It goes without saying. If you're on a temp desk, that's different. If you're on a contract desk, obviously you're more than likely going to be working with people who are active job seekers at one point or another. But what's wrong if you're working on a perm desk? It really depends on the role that you're looking for. If you're if you're looking to help your client hire for certain kind of roles, and if you're discounting active job seekers just because they're looking, we're really looking at people who could be very good at their job, and we're ignoring the reason why. We don't know why they're actively looking. We don't know why their LinkedIn profile says open to new roles. And if we see that, it shouldn't discount that. Right? There could be something, there could be issues on in their work culture. Maybe there's been a downsize. We don't know. So let's not assume and discount active job seekers. And again, I'm hoping that that's kind of more of an old school thing now. Writing a general job ad that doesn't weed out weak matches. And so what's wrong with that? It takes a millisecond to apply to a job today. And for this reason, it's often easy for a recruiter to amass thousands of resumes when placing an ad online. But what's wrong with this is that unless you've set some kind of bar for a candidate to jump over, and it's too time consuming to go through thousands of resumes, putting a few things in the ad to knock out those people who are just sending their resume off without considering if they're even qualified. And I know there's different schools of thought around that. But one of the things is that if you are just doing a ton of generalized jobs, you're going to get a ton of resumes and the time spent. So try to have really well-written job ads. Other things that we want to take a look at is turning a blind eye to candidates who don't fit at least a 7 out of 10. So what's wrong with this? And I'll ask you guys to type this one in chat, because this is one I feel very passionate about. How many times have you said to yourself, or have you had a colleague say, well, I can't find any candidates. I'm not finding the perfect fit. If you were to type into chat, how many times have you said, I can't find any candidates, or you've heard people say, there's no candidates because I'm not getting that 10 out of 10. Or maybe early on in your career. I said it a few times already today. Thank you, Colleen, for your honesty, right? Looking for the purple unicorn on several occasions, many times. This drives me crazy. Candidates look at the title only, senior project manager, and there's so many areas for this title. I have had, yes, right? So get specific on things most of the time, many times. So this is one I really feel passionate about. And I feel passionate about this one because it happens all too often. And I hear it a lot from our own recruiters, or recruiters that have been doing this for many, many years that sometimes forget. Or our newer recruiters who are disheartened. They're like, why? This is so hard. Why did I sign up for recruiting? I can't find anyone. Because if we're looking for that 10 out of 10, and if we told a client, by the way, that comes back to setting expectations with a client, that we should never, under any circumstance, ever tell a client we're going to find them a 10 out of 10. Don't do that. I'm going to say to the client, listen, I am going to be really excited if I find you that candidate or 3 candidates who meet that 7.5 out of 10. And let me explain to you why. If we're looking for that 10 out of 10, who probably doesn't exist, we're going to be missing all of the amazing other candidates who have so much potential and might be missing 1 or 2 areas that can be worked on. Now, if the candidate's missing 2 or 3 things that are critical to their job, well, that's one thing. But if we're looking for that 9 out of 10 or that 10 out of 10, chances are we're just going to be spinning our wheels. We're not going to find the right one. And that comes back to the beginning of the job order. Do not tell the client, I'm going to find you a 10 out of 10. Don't promise them that. Don't promise the perfect candidate. I'm going to find you the best possible candidate who's available with the criteria that you're looking for. However, if the criteria is unrealistic, if you know the market, if you're working with your colleagues and peers who know the market and you rely on them for intel, be honest with the client. 7 out of 10. We're super excited about that. 8 out of 10. But anything beyond that, we're going to be like super lucky. And so if we're turning a blind eye to the candidate who doesn't fit this to the T, we're setting ourselves up again for failure and for spending a lot of time trolling through LinkedIn and doing all sorts of Boolean strings and all sorts of things to find that elusive purple squirrel or that unicorn candidate. And if we're too rigid on the skills and the experience, that can make you miss out on people who have terrific attitudes, depending on the job. Sometimes skills are skills, but again, to what degree? And so we want to think about what is it and how can we have that conversation with the client? And so thinking about how do I move the goalposts a little bit so that I have more candidates to bring to the client. 7 out of 10. When I started training internally at our company, I remind all of our new recruiters and our experienced recruiters, I say, hey, everyone, it's okay. We're good at 7 out of 10, as long as the client knows what's potentially missing in that candidate and it's nothing critical. So another one, which might sound counterintuitive to the one that I said in number 2 about discounting job, or number 3, is placing all your faith in a well-written ad. So yes, you want to have a well-written ad that kind of weeds out, you don't want 1,000 resumes, but also placing all your faith in a well-written ad also doesn't work. And I have trained and interviewed, as I did a lot of interviewing for our own company, so many recruiters, the only thing they do is they respond to resumes who apply to a job ad. That's it. No sourcing, no LinkedIn, nothing else, no headhunting. It's just the job ads. And the downside to that is obviously we're only finding those people who are actively looking for a job, not the other ones that could be hiding out there, not getting referrals. So what's wrong with that is, again, missing out on some really good potential candidates. And then the last one is saying I have no time to source. And that is rubbish, right? No time to source. I have no time to source. You have to source. Like, that's what the clients are paying us to do. That is our job. And so 30 minutes a day, right? It's like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. I say 30 minutes a day keeps the bill collector away. So 30 minutes a day, build it in to actively source for the current jobs you have. It goes without saying, but to keep the pool fresh. So if we were to take a look at this list in terms of the sourcing mistakes recruiters make, what's the number one, just one, and just type out the number. You don't have to type out the sentence. Which one resonates with you the most? That, again, we all do all this stuff. And we would be kidding ourselves if we didn't admit that we've all at some point or another fallen into some of these mistakes. We're human and we're recruiters. But which one of all of them do you find yourself encountering more often than not that you would like to maybe work on turning that one around? Okay, so 4, so 2 and 4. So discounting active job seekers, number 4, turning a blind eye to the 7 out of 10. Okay, 4, 4. Okay. All right. And so turning a blind eye. So number 1, making assumptions about candidates that we've never met. Okay, excellent. So I've got 20 of you on this call, so let's hear with some others. I'm hoping that everyone is picking up some things here. Anyone else? Okay, number 1, making assumptions. Okay, so that 7 out of 10 is also where that chart idea comes into play, right? That chart that clients might use, a matrix or a grid, something along those lines to say, okay, actually, this person has this. Check, 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 check. Okay, so they don't have that. How critical is that in the grand scheme of things? So 1 in 5. Okay, excellent. And then not having a sourcing strategy in place. I left this one for the last because this is the one that we're not going to spend a lot of time on today because that is a whole entire session in of itself on a sourcing strategy, but just not having a strategy in place. That is a big one. And it's probably one that a lot of us have more than likely experienced on a daily, regular basis, just kind of going for it, right? It's like shooting a fish in a barrel, just hoping that I catch something. I'm just going to try here. I'm going to try here. I'm going to try there. And then we get distracted because this email comes in and that comes in. And next thing we know, it's just we're like a pinball in a pinball machine, right? Just kind of bouncing all over the place. And so that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is not even having a strategy to begin with. A couple other things to think about before you source is, we're not going to go through all of these. Again, in some of the other sessions, the legal sessions that you're taking, the one on business ethics that you'll be taking if you haven't already, these are the areas that are also considerations to be keeping in mind. Again, so there's so much that goes behind the process. So much that the client doesn't actually appreciate or even realize all the things that we're taking into consideration. And so in the context of sourcing and interviewing candidates for our client roles, the principle that ignorance as well as is not an excuse to discriminate, it becomes really particularly salient. And so the recruitment process should be firmly rooted in practices that promote fairness, that promote equality, that promote inclusivity. It is crucial, and no matter what we do, that all the candidates that we're working with, regardless of their background, ethnicity, gender, disability, or any other characteristics, are given equal opportunities. They're assessed based on skills, based on qualifications, and their suitability for the role. And so in the realm of any kind of talent acquisition, it really is vital to establish and to adhere to unbiased sourcing strategies. And that's sort of full stop. If we want to be those ambassadors for our industry, if you want to be ambassadors for your brand and for your company and for yourself, it's a full stop. Unbiased sourcing strategies. It involves so many things. It involves ensuring that job advertisements, descriptions, requirements are free from biased language. It means that they appeal to a diverse pool of candidates. Moreover, also thinking about other platforms. Where else are you going to promote these things and reaching a wider audience? Again, a more diverse audience. And it also is impacted when you're thinking about interviewing your candidates. So not just the sourcing, but that selection part of it. When you're interviewing the candidates, are you having a structured interview process? Are you utilizing standard evaluation criteria, like the example of that form or some sort of interview form? Are you minimizing the impact of unconscious bias? And interviewers, our clients too, hopefully they're trained and also made aware of potential for bias, but that we ourselves, we can only control what we can do is to make sure that we are aware of potential for bias and ensuring that we are equipped with the knowledge and the tools to conduct our interviews with our candidates so that our interviews are objective and that they're as fair as possible. And that's where forms, that's where grids, that's where matrices come into play. I'm going to share an example with you. I was early-ish in my career, well, probably about 3 years into my career. So yeah, early on in my career, I was, my area of specialization for all the years when I was running a full desk was sales and marketing, permanent sales and marketing. And I was invited to meet with a client, a prospective client, to take a job order for a sales rep for their sporting goods and corporate promotion type company. Brought a newbie along with me so that she can do a little bit of shadowing in the field. And as soon as we sat down, the individual started to make comments on how we looked. He also proceeded to make comments on exactly the look of the candidate that he was looking for. Not what the attributes, not the skills, but the physical look with explicit details. So knowing our code of ethics and standards, I folded up my portfolio and I said, thank you very much. This isn't the right opportunity for us. I wish you the best of luck. And we walked out. Newbie with me, completely flabbergasted, but recognizing to not take on jobs, to not work with clients in situations where we're being asked to make decisions that are based on race, gender, religion, age, disability, sexual orientation. So in summary, this is critical. So things to really think about before any sourcing takes place. So recruiting sources, so we'll move on to recruiting sources for headhunting. And headhunting, again, is essentially what we do, right? We're finding new people. We're bringing the best candidates in front of the clients to help them make good hiring decisions. And they're putting their trust in us to bring them those right people, that we've vetted them, that we've done our part to find the very best possible. But there's so many avenues that we can look at. And this is just a short list that I probably need to update. But there's so many sources, online sources, places to post job ads, right? From LinkedIn, Talent Insights, Recruiter, Twitter. And how do we do that, right? You're finding followers. There's advanced search in Twitter, if nobody knows that you can find candidates in Twitter with an advanced search function. Facebook, there's ways to source within Facebook, all sorts of interesting things that you can do there. Google, X-ray searches, Boolean, staff directories, membership directories, association websites, Zoom info. Those are all online. What about where you can post a job ad? Right? There's so many areas that we can post job ads, right? On Facebook, Twitter, Kijiji. Some people have had success on Kijiji, LinkedIn, associations, so on and so forth, reaching out to universities and colleges, different job boards, different industry websites. So there's no shortage of where to find candidates. And this is online stuff. We're not talking about referrals and our CRM and interviewing candidates, and as well also asking them who they know. But where can you find candidates to headhunt? Have I missed any obvious sources when you take a look at this that are not currently listed? I'd be curious, and I'll make sure I add it to this. Oh yes, Indeed. Thank you. Yes, Indeed, Monster. How did I forget that? Okay, Indeed and Monster. Thank you. Where else? Anywhere else? Job fairs, local events. Yes. So those are in-person events. Yahoo, Zoom info. Yeah, I've got Zoom info there, which is an amazing tool if it's used correctly. Okay. So what happens if you use all of these sources? So we've established certain things, like we know what, that we need to understand the job order. We know that we need to validate selection criteria, that we need to make sure it's up to standard. But when we're thinking about finding these people to call them, why would you not use all these methods? Why would you not use all these methods? You will get duplicate applicants. Okay. You will get any others. What would be the downside in using all of these sources? Job bank. Okay, someone said another place is the job bank. Time constraints usually have a factor in what is used, high cost. Okay. So it's important to recognize that different types of candidates will be hanging out in different areas. And I can't speak for what that looks like, right? Only you know your space is the best. Only you know by asking candidates, where do you typically, right? Where would I typically find candidates such as yourself? Where do they typically tend to hang out? And maybe you don't know. Maybe some of your candidates, they're just not on Twitter. But if you, even if you're not a Twitter person, and I'm not a huge Twitter person, but even if you're not, and you happen to be in a place where most of your candidate pool, the types of candidates you tend to go after, are usually on Twitter, you need to get on Twitter. And so it's thinking about where will you find the best success, and having some that might appeal to certain jobs or might fit with certain roles and certain jobs versus others. But you also don't want to oversaturate it. You want to pick the ones that you can do well and become really good at, and then utilize those sources. So it might depend on different approaches and depending on the different roles that you're working on. But the number one source at the end of the day, you can go online all you want. You can Twitter all you want and find people through different sources, but the number one source is to get referrals. Number one, referrals come from candidates. They come from clients. They come from other consultants. The referrals are your single most valuable source of new candidates because you come to that new relationship somewhat pre-approved by someone that they know and trust, right? Building that referral base takes time. It's not something that just happens overnight, but it does require you to establish rapport and build trust. And trust is earned. It is based on honesty with your candidate. It's based on consistency with your candidate. It's based on integrity. It's based on your professionalism. And once you've established those things and you built rapport and trust, then you're in a position, right, to ask candidates, who do you know? I learned the hard way very, very early in my career by randomly reaching out to somebody who I determined was not a fit for the role. And rather than asking that person and building a relationship and building some rapport, I went straight to the ask, who do you know? She didn't know who I was. I didn't know who she was. She was completely turned off. And I learned, and she complained. And so I learned the hard way. We want to establish rapport and trust and then be able to then reach out. How many of you ask for referrals? Just say yes, yes, no, no, like referrals. How often is that your go-to? Okay. Because not enough people ask for referrals. All the time. Hey, excellent. You guys are so good. Excellent. So asking for referrals, but it's funny when I'm training people and they're like, I can't find anyone. Well, have you asked for a referral? Oh, no, I never thought about that. What do you mean? That's like the number one source. Pick up the phone, call your people, email them, whatever you have to do to get a hold of them, text them, whatever the way is to communicate. But asking for referrals of people that you've interviewed, you've developed a good rapport with, people you've placed, talking to clients, talking to industry peers, whoever it may be, is reaching out and asking for those referrals. That's your golden ticket. And we just often forget to do that. And I would make that a part of your interview form or your screening script. And if you have an interview form, if you don't have one, I would stick it on a sticky note on your screen, on your computer that says WDYK. Who do you know? Just WDYK. And then constantly be asking, who do you know that might be open for a change? Who do you know who is good at what they do? They may or may not be looking for a change. I'll reach out to them. Who do you know that excels in the field? Who do you know that you've worked with who, was the top salesperson in their company? And so by asking that question at all times, it's going to help you build a great pool of candidates and not just constantly be chasing new candidates over and over again and going down the LinkedIn rabbit hole. And going through the 100 resumes that get sent to you on a job description or job post by asking and reaching out. And it helps you stay in touch with those candidates, right? It gives you a chance to reconnect with them and they'll think about you. I got an email a few weeks ago from somebody who I must have headhunted literally about 18 years ago, who reached out to me and said, my buddy is looking for a job. Can you help him out? It was amazing. I couldn't believe it. So it's connecting with those people. So who do you know that is looking to make a change? Who do you report to? Who's outstanding in your field, right? Where do you know I can best find these individuals? So constantly be thinking about referrals. And then that passive candidate sourcing. Really make it part of your daily practice. It's a sanity saver. It's truly a sanity saver. Make it a daily part of your activity. Passive candidate sourcing with a phone and good search tools and with the desire and the recognition of the importance, you can find 3 to 4 top people for any assignment within a couple of days. So constantly have a pipeline of candidates. And even if you don't have a job for them, how many believe that you have to have a job to pitch to a candidate to call a new candidate? How many, whether you currently believe that or you had at one point in your career believed that you have to have an active job order in order to call a candidate? Anyone ever? And again, I see it all the time. So I'm just curious by an honest group of feedback here. Absolutely not. Okay. Yes, absolutely not. So, okay. So how many believe that we have to have a job to call a candidate, or at one point believed that? I've only got one response. So that means that nope, nope, nope. Okay. Well, the amount of questions and times and challenges that I've been placed with by people saying, I can't call, I'm not going to just headhunt somebody. Number one, I don't have time, but I don't have a job. What am I going to talk to them about? Right? What am I going to talk to them about? Don't I have to pitch a job to them? Absolutely no. You talk to them about the fact that I'm not working on something right now specific. That's not why I called you today. The reason why I called you today is that I'm in the business of looking and working with individuals who bring skills like yours, XYZ, ... to some of our top clients. And I'm reaching out to you because what attracted you to their profile and wanted to engage in a conversation to see if at some point, whether it's in the near future or down the road, you might be interested in having a further conversation. That's it, right? But it's important to be doing that constantly. And even if it's just a few a day. Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. It's now 2 o'clock Central Time. So we're going to come back in 15 minutes. So fuel up, bio break, grab some water, and we will be back exactly in 15 minutes and we will carry on. So now we're going to move to step 3. So step number 1, job order, intake. Step number 2, figuring out a bit of a sourcing plan, where to source, why to source, how to source, a little bit around the how. But now we're going to go to step 3, which is that screening and that interviewing part of it. So the first half really talks about the recruitment process. And then the second is that more the selection. Now we're getting more towards how do I identify and select. And so when we're thinking about the screening and interviewing process, depending on your desks, depending on the roles, depending on the types of candidates, whether it's temp, perm, contract, your processes around screening and interviewing will all vary. That goes without saying, but it's making certain that whatever that process is, we still want it to be as thorough as it's relevant to the roles that we're in. So good recruiters qualify the candidates they meet in advance of presenting them to jobs by making sure that candidates have the skills and the capabilities required and the right motivations, that they can speak to the right candidate about the right positions. And again, the idea is, do they have the skills? And it goes without saying that if that's the bare bones minimum, if they don't have the skills, we shouldn't be speaking with them for that specific role. But do they have the capabilities? And there's a difference. And we'll discuss that in a little bit. The difference between do they have the skills, but do they have the capabilities, and do they have the motivation? And one of the things that we really want to make certain is that when we're really dissecting these candidate conversations that we're having and determining that skill set, the capabilities is what will define candidate A from candidate B. So candidate A and candidate B might have the exact same list of skills, but the capabilities is the difference of how good one is over the other. To what degree are they good in those skills? What accomplishments have they had with those types of skills and what they can bring to the table? And that's the part that really helps us bring the right candidates forward, or hopefully the right candidates, when we understand the difference between the two. So it's not enough that a candidate has skills. We want to go further than that and then deeper to that. So we'll take a look at some of those things. But before we do that, why do we even screen in the first place? There are so many options in front of us in terms of screening and assessments and how we may go about in taking a look at how do we break down which are the right candidates and what backgrounds do they bring that align with the roles that we're working on. But why do we even screen? I mean, I'm hoping that this isn't happening in this group here, but I certainly have had my fair share of, number one, coming against people that I've worked, in other companies where they don't even bother screening because it's a race against the clock. They're trying to get the candidates into the client the fastest to get that timestamp and don't even bother with the full screening process, right? It's just really, do you have this? Yep. Do you have that? Yep. That, check, and then send them off to the client. But that's really doing a disservice to the client. It's a disservice to the candidate, and it's a disservice to the recruiter and the company that they work for. And so really by going through a screening process, whether some people might have one conversation and then they go to the client, and that's very much part of some processes, whether they have a conversation, which is a screen, and then schedule a second follow-up call for more in-depth interview, that might be part of your process. So those areas might vary depending on the kind of role and what your company's processes are. But the importance, the significance of not just submitting a resume without having a proper conversation. Hopefully we don't need to spend too much time on the why behind that. But why do we even screen in the first place? And it's number one, to bring that pool of candidates down. So we're thinking about what is that selection criteria that I'm going through to make certain that I'm screening out and screening in the right people. So by having something that's a standard, that is, whether it's a grid format, or you just know exactly what you're measuring against, and you're looking for that 7 out of 10 for those candidates. What am I measuring that against, so that I'm doing an unbiased assessment of all the candidates and ranking them fairly? So you want to reduce that pool down. I want to know, is this candidate a star? Is this a candidate somebody I feel good putting in front of my client? Am I putting desperate and I don't have anyone else to bring to them, which we never want to feel that way? Or are they actually a good candidate? Am I pretty excited about this? Am I wasting time if I interview this candidate further? Will I be wasting the client's time? Will I be wasting the candidate's time? What opportunities do I have? So as we're going through the screening conversation, it's reduce it down, but I'm thinking so many things, right? Are they a great candidate? Will I feel good about them? Am I going to waste my time or theirs? What opportunities might I have right now that might be a fit for this candidate, but down the road if I don't have one? And are they a match, right? Do they meet the specific role that I might be interviewing them for? So we're looking at a variety of different assessment tools and a variety of different methods that might help us to break this down. But some of these are just the obvious, right? These are just some of the bare bones basic of how do we assess candidates. So looking at the resume alone isn't enough. Now, I don't know about a lot of you, but I know that the process that I always took with our company was I never, ever, ever submitted a candidate if there wasn't a candidate profile attached to that resume. So a bit of a bio or a summary. It usually wasn't just 1 or 2 bullet points. It usually had some, good information for the candidate. About the candidates. So I would want to include that, but I can't really include a really good summary of a candidate if I haven't properly screened or interviewed them. The other thing too is that the resume, it goes without saying, is one aspect, but how many times have we had a client just say, just send me the resume, right? Maybe you want to hop on a call with a client and discuss the candidate with them. Maybe the client's like, just send me a resume. But how much information actually gets missed between the pages when they're not, you're not looking at all the other things that help build the story of why that client should meet our candidate. If my goal is to get, generally speaking, I liked to get, if I said 4 candidates, if my client agrees to meet 3 of the 4, I'm thrilled. And in doing that goes beyond just the resume. It goes what goes in that conversation. Maybe they have to fill out an application form. Maybe some of us, our processes are to send pre-interview questionnaires to the candidates. It's the phone screen, it's the interview. If there's any web-based information, maybe it's reading and scoring. It's that matrix or the rubric. that I showed you earlier, that a lot of our clients might use some kind of scoring matrix or rubric to really carefully, in an unbiased way, to assess the candidates. Maybe there's some electronic scoring, maybe it's certain keywords or what's in the ATS. So there's a whole plethora of different assessment tools. There's reference checks, there's background checks, there's online profiles and assessments that we'll look at. But there's a variety of things that we want to be taking into consideration and into factor when we're really screening these candidates and making sure that we're bringing the best people. So first and foremost is receiving the resumes. While reviewing the resumes, obviously we want to keep a lot of things in mind to ensure that we do a better screening of potential candidates. So there's, again, a lot of stuff that goes on in our mind is, well, why are they looking for a job change to begin with? What about the longevity in each organization? What about the long gaps in employment? What about their job hopping? What about the lack of career progression, depending on their role? Are there missing dates? Is their education missing if required? And again, always adhering to no discrimination. What are some of the other things that you're really thinking about when you look at a resume? When you think about receiving these resumes, there's a lot of stuff that goes into what we're actually looking for. It's not just a piece of paper and we're saying, have they worked here? Check. Have they worked there? Check, check. There's other things that if we're really not putting that thought or some of that consideration, and this could all be done in 90 seconds and by looking at a resume in like 30 to 90 seconds over time, that's how fast we get at screening them and knowing what we're looking for. But there's a lot of stuff that we're wanting to really have into consideration. So again, it's not just what's on the page. It's not just that there's other factors that will help us to make sure that we're, again, bringing the right people to the clients, that we don't have surprises. Because as recruiters, we typically don't like surprises. If there's one thing that I know about recruiters is we don't enjoy a surprise. The only surprise that we enjoy as recruiters is when the client calls us and says, I can't decide between your two candidates, so we're going to hire both. Other than that, most surprises we want to try to mitigate. So what other things might you keep in mind as you're, first of all, even just receiving the resume that you want to be thinking before you screen them? Any thoughts? Oh, I skipped it. I have to go back to that page. What other things might you think about once you made the decision to connect with them? So the language of the resume, formatting, attention to detail, right? Is there attention to detail in their resume? Is there a lot of spelling errors? Right? Overall language, the tone of the resume. And remember, once we've agreed to work with a client and once they've agreed to work with us, we are an extension of that client. We are representing them. So the minute we work for them, we become liable. We're liable. We're an extension of that. And so we have to make certain that when we're recognizing our own liabilities, that we need to make sure that we're really doing our thorough job on bringing forward to the client the candidates who say who they truly are and representing themselves accurately. So I'm looking for a whole variety of things I'm asking myself before I even get on the phone. And other things, right? We want to understand what are some red flags. And resumes by design truly are documents that candidates have free rein to describe their skills, their experience. It can lead to so much ambiguity. It can lead to potential issues. It could lead to a lot of fake resumes, which is on the rise. Fake resumes, fraudulent candidates, fake LinkedIn profiles are on the rise. Candidates showing up for interviews who aren't even the people who they are on the resume. Different people coming up for interviews, not turning on their cameras or having somebody else do the interview for them. Putting fake resume or fake universities on their resumes. How many of us have seen those 10-page resumes where it looks like it's just been copied and pasted by a whole bunch of different resumes, and the formatting and the font and nothing is even the same, right? So really identifying red flags and knowing what are the fake universities, what can be a fake resume, what are those red flags, and asking to that. Okay, so what could be an example? What are some examples? And yes, Daniela said, check LinkedIn for discrepancies. Absolutely. But again, right now, we're seeing more and more fake LinkedIn profiles that are linked to resumes too. So what are some examples? If you were to think of some of the examples like career gaps, job hopping, which may not be a red flag. It may truly be someone's been downsized, someone's been restructured, someone's on contract or temp, and they haven't labeled that on their resume that they're a temp or contract. It's easy to assume, oh my gosh, that candidate can't hold the job. Well, no, maybe they're temp, and we need to understand that before we rule them out. But what are some examples that come to mind automatically that you would look for that would jump out at you? I know someone said formatting, spelling, gaps in employment, unexplained gaps in employment. Here's some other obvious red flags that you really want to be keeping in mind. Doesn't mean you may not call the person, but you need to really delve into generic job responsibilities.
I have one. When candidates just put their years of experience, like they put 2019 to 2020, you don't know if they were there from December 2019 to January 2021, that's 2 months, or if they started at the beginning of December and worked to the end of January, that's almost 2 years. So when they don't put the years, like the months, yeah, I find that sometimes to be a red flag.
100%. Thank you. Was that Colleen?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Thank you. So 100%. If they don't put dates on their months, they may not, because they may not think so, right? It may not actually even be a red flag. They just may not realize. But that's not on them. It's on us. It's on us to recognize that and go, okay, I need to understand the difference. What month did you start? What month did you end? Is it 2 months? Is it 2 years? Right? So it's on us. When there's red flags, it's not on the candidate. I mean, if they lie, of course, that's on the candidate, but it's still on us to dig and to ask and then to re-ask and then to re-ask again, to be that broken record, because it's our liability. It's the client putting the trust in us to ask those questions. Multiple fonts, different format, right? So finding the most qualified candidate, right? How do we determine the perfect candidate? Well, as we discovered, sometimes we don't find the all caps perfect candidate. It may not be about the 10 out of 10. If I'm finding someone a 10 out of 10, I want a very high fee for that, because I worked extremely hard for that 10 out of 10, and they better offer them the best possible job offer they can find them, because that 10 out of 10, unlikely. So sometimes though, the best candidate that we determine, or that the client might determine is the best candidate, is not always the best candidate, because they may not be motivated for the job. They may have everything on paper. Their LinkedIn profile might be glowing, but if they're not motivated and they're not interested, it doesn't matter how good they are. Our job is to understand what we're looking for. It's to understand the personality to the best that we can of the candidate and the personality of the company. And how do they fit to that? And are they motivated? Our job isn't to squish a square peg into a round hole. And so there's key factors, right? We're looking at skills, as I mentioned earlier. Can they do the job? Do they have the technical? Do they have the IQ, EQ? Do they have the education, right? What about other things? What about their capabilities, right? How well can they do the job? So again, skills comes from the resume. It comes from what we pick up in the interviews. Maybe there's different character traits that we might find from, testing, how do they fit the job? Okay. And then motivation in the big circle. That's it. They could have all the skills in the world. When you have a rubric or a matrix and they've got check, and they're like capabilities, they're proven, there's a track record, they can do the job like no other. Awesome, right? We're excited now because we found what we think is that 10 out of 10. But if they don't have the right reason to want to accept our client's role, if they don't have the right reason to even be talking to us when we call them out of the blue, even if they've applied to us and they don't have the right reason, right? If their motivation or their wound isn't really solid, meaning, oh, you know what, I'm just having a bad day at work today and I thought I'd apply to another job. That's not really solid, right? What happens when you have a better day, and do you accept our client's job, or do you just turn it down because you're having a better day? Right? There's lots of things that we can look at in terms of different like wounds and motivations and career. You know, some person doesn't want to work in the office. They only want to work from home now, or somebody's tired of working from home and they only want to work in the office, so their company doesn't allow it. Somebody's tired of driving 45 minutes to work and back every day. So geography, maybe there's certain things that just can't be resolved in their current situation. That does make sense to them. Someone is tired of doing 75% travel. They have a young family now. They want 25% travel. If their current employer can't change that, that's a solid wound, right? But if someone's saying to you, well, you know, I'm just kind of unsure about this, or they're kind of wavering, or it's not solid, right? Do we really have a candidate who's truly, truly serious? So the most important one becomes motivation. So when we're assessing candidates, we're looking again a little bit further into some of these things, right? So skills, as I mentioned, capabilities, and the motivation. And when we're talking about different things around the skills, those are like the must-haves, generally speaking, from a client's perspective, right? They have to have, you know, experience with C++, they have to have experience with ABC 123 XYZ, they need to have 3 years of that. But the capabilities is they often forget that. That's where our job comes in. That's where our interviewing skills come in. That's where our screening needs to come in. This is when we prepare a candidate's resume to submit to a client and we want to throw in a couple of interview notes or candidate notes. That's where the capabilities part comes in. That's what defines candidate A from candidate B and why they might want to interview our candidates. So this is where the digging comes in. This is why we need to become good interviewers and asking good questions, asking and asking and asking. And asking them what skills they have isn't enough. It's asking them, how much time have you spent doing that? What have you done that's made you stand out in your department? What are some of the projects that you've worked on that you led? What were some of the outcomes of that project? How good are you at on a scale of 1 to 10? And why did you give yourself that rank? How would you rate your capability in blank? Right? So that those types of questions. And sometimes when it comes down to that assessment, it's just time, us knowing what good looks like. Our experience of talking to so many candidates means that we'll have a fluency in what is typically considered exceptional. Maybe we're asking the candidates questions. What have been your biggest challenges that you faced at work? How did you deal with it? Asking them situational, behavioral type questions. Walk me through that project. When you decide to leave the company, what's the legacy you leave behind? Right? What's the most exciting project or piece of work that you've done that you're proud about, and why? So it's these things that make that person stand out, that goes beyond sending a client a laundry list of skills that a candidate might have. Especially that we need to assume that it's not our candidates only, unless they've paid us exclusivity and a retainer and all that stuff. But still, surprises can still happen. So when we're looking at motivation, and if this is the most important one, it takes time for us to ask them those questions to really understand. And I'm not saying that we all need to be, you know, psychologically really understand the inner workings, but asking them the why is now a good time for change. Why is this the opportunity that you're looking for? Why are you unhappy in your current contract? Why do you prefer temp over perm? Why do you prefer perm over temp, right? Is temp an option for you if you're looking to fill a gap? Why not? And keep asking what else and what else and what else is such a powerful question for a recruiter. And asking them these questions on looking at some of the things. So if we take a look at what could be some valid career routes, I gave you some examples about geography, location, travel. But if it's the most important one, what are some career wounds, right? What are some things that you think are valid wounds? Thinking about your own desk, whether it's temp, whether it's perm, whether it's contract, whether it's both. And if you really think about a valid career wound that a candidate may have, what could it be? Again, the reason for change. Being denied a promotion, limited room for growth and advancement. Okay, so there's little room to grow, right? They feel like they've got more horsepower in them. Again, the advancement. What other valid reasons are there? Rounds of layoffs, right? So maybe they were just caught in the layoff, or maybe they're nervous, mistreatment in the workplace, discrimination, pay is low, horrible culture, working structure. So does everybody feel that money alone is a big enough motivator? Why or why not? Is money alone, if you call the candidate and they say, I'm always looking for more money, which I'm sure we've all heard at some point or another, is that a big enough motivator alone? Okay, money isn't everything. I think it depends. Any other thoughts? Is that enough, right? You call a candidate and they're like, yeah, I'm looking for more money. Great. You'll launch into your pitch. And then what happens? Okay, so to Alexandra's point, if it's significantly below industry standard, it is. No, there are more things to consider: culture, treatment of employees, possible advancement, right? So we get excited when we call that candidate and they're like, oh, sure, I'm willing to talk. I'll take more money. Great, great. And then we go into the launch, we get excited, we put them in front of the client, and then they turn it down. Well, you know, things are pretty good here. It's not that bad. Like I said, more money, but I don't think it's worth it for the extra few $1,000s. Okay, so I'm okay if a candidate has a money wound, only if it's extreme situation where it's below standard, or maybe it's a temp person who's not working and they need the money and they're willing to take on temp assignments, but we want them to have other things that they're interested in. But the only way I'm okay with the money one is that if there's other valid wounds associated with it, attached to that. Yes, I would like more money, and I'm traveling too much, and I don't want to work from home anymore, and the geography doesn't work, and the company culture, and I've been overlooked for promotions, and right? So there's got to be other things coupled with that, so that we don't end up having a candidate that turns it down because they got a counteroffer. So we want to be thinking about additional factors, right? So other things that are important for us when we're identifying these candidates. So if we're looking at additional factors, right, there might be personality, the character traits, and the culture. So how does the personality and the culture work with that individual's character traits? So what's their personality and where that intersects, and the culture of the organization and where that intersects. And it's important, especially if you're anyone who's looking for a candidate on a permanent basis, but even if it's a long contract, even if it's a short contract or a temp position, you still want there to be a good fit there. You want to have a good experience. So what sort of personality, what kind of appeals to that person and their overall traits, and then that of the culture. And then also looking at, again, that overall fit. So from an overall fit, does the person, right, the candidate, is it the right job for the candidate? Is the candidate the right fit for the client? Is the client the right fit for the candidate? And does it all work together, right? So overall, what are the different character traits between the candidate and the company? And then how does that all fit, right? You want to make sure that there's that intersect there. Our job is not to squish that square peg into that round hole again. So if it all tends to flow and work well, you have a better chance of success. And when we're looking at determining the fit, there's the person, job, and the organization. So the person, organization, and the person, job. When the values and interests of a job, of the candidate, matches the organizational culture. And then the person job fit is when the skills of the candidate match the job requirements. So we're taking a look at examples, right? There's some organizations, maybe the overall, culture, it's dynamic, lots of teamwork, a lot of collaboration. right? Maybe they're an organization that really values working in the office place. They have a good culture, right? Maybe they're known for having, fun, good perks and good benefits. So what does the person look for, right? From an overall fit? What's the company known for? And again, we're not all working with the Googles, but what are they known for? But then also, is it the right fit? Is it the right job for that person? And so one of the challenge that we all face is fall offs, right? Nobody wants a fall off. And so when we're thinking about how do we reduce new hire turnover and fall offs from our candidates, what can we do? What are the things that we need to keep in mind to reduce the turnover and the fall offs of our candidates? So what do we need to do? Keeping this in mind, right? Keeping this in mind on, the culture, the company, the job itself. What do we want to think about to try to mitigate the fall offs? Any thoughts? Ask the candidate what they're looking for by moving into a different company area, asking the candidate to be open and honest with you. What is their motivation for the move? Okay. So it's really taking these factors into mind. Where are they at? What are they looking for? Plans for staying in the city? Do they have friends? Do they have family here? Right? Especially if it's somebody who's relocating or has relocated. So keeping a good relationship with those you place, because they're number one, you want to make sure you understand, you get their feedback, you understand what's happening. But it's really understanding how these three key things intersect, so that we're not just cramming a candidate in front of a company because we have no other candidate to put in front of them. It's not just saying to the candidate, oh yeah, I know that's the culture that you fit best in, and that you prefer an open door policy, and that's where you thrive in, and then you put them somewhere where it's totally closed door and they feel they're on an island, and they call you up and they're like, this isn't a fit. Well, what do you mean it's not a fit? It's a great company. Or were we listening? Were we just so eager to make a placement and we put everything else aside just to make that happen? So there are things that we can do to try to mitigate that from the get-go. So interviewing, other things, as a third-party professional, your ability to identify and screen candidates is a large part of the service that a client is looking for when they engage with a recruiter. There is a surprising number of agency recruiters who fail to interview their candidates properly. Getting good at this creates genuine opportunities and makes you stand out. So as I mentioned before, it's a surprising, staggering number who don't actually interview their candidates, who will just submit a resume with a few notes, or just do like a very, very, very quick. And the interviewing, again, it could be in some contexts, for some people, an interview might be 15 minutes. An interview might be 30 minutes. An interview might be 60 minutes. It's entirely dependent on your desk, on your company structure. But there's ways to have a good interview, and there's ways to have a not so good interview. The best way, I'm not saying my way is the best way, but my personal style is to always use a structured format and to tailor each interview form for each role, but always ask the key questions for the candidate type and the role itself. Because again, we want to make certain that when we're going through our process of identifying and select the best candidates for the job, that we're measuring, just because you love one candidate because they're a certain personality or they're dynamic, but they don't have the right skills. So maybe maybe that person fits into some area, maybe not into the other area, and that's okay. Maybe the other candidate, their personality is not as dynamic, but their skills are higher. So where's their strength? Where's their weakness? But I want to understand both on a fair level. So I use a structured approach. I know this is unstructured because that's going to be the what not to do, hopefully. So the unstructured is that pinball in a pinball machine, right? You go into your call, you've got the resume open, and you're just firing a bunch of questions based on the resume. And then the next person, a bunch of questions based on the resume, but there'll be a lot of questions that you've asked one that you haven't asked the other. And obviously you have to free form it a bit because there's going to be different responses and different reasons to ask certain questions based on a resume. But you want to have structure so that you're asking the important critical questions are going to be the same types of questions. So, but a lot of people are using an unstructured approach, which leaves a lot of room for missing important details. And then the client comes back and says, well, how would you categorize candidate A versus candidate B versus candidate C? And what's the differences between them? And you're like, I'm not sure because I don't have that information. So without this one is a set, right? They're not using predetermined questions. Some key questions prepared in advance, such as, so tell me about yourself. Maybe some prepared questions. Different questions may be asked of different applicants because interviewers formulate questions based on the interviewee's responses only. And this is how I learned. When I started off 20 years ago, this is how I was taught. Take your resume, and I sat down across the table from the candidate, and I'm scribbling notes all over the sides of the resumes. So the resumes just had like diagrams and charts, and I was writing stuff on the back. No structure. And then also lacks reliability. This really, that free forming it does create a lack of reliability. The other format, my preferred structure approach, is the structure. And because the primary purpose of an interview is to transfer information from the candidate to the recruiter, and then from us to the client, we can take a more formal approach like this, or that informal approach. And if we're thinking about that, what's going to give the best outcome, the fair comparison against those KSAOs, and so that we are also ensuring that everyone is measured equally, that this would be my recommendation. All candidates are asked the same predetermined questions, no matter what. And of course, they'll be varying based on their responses. You have to go through their resume and ask questions that varies from one to the next. I get that. And then bias is reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions, which are based on an analysis of job duties and requirements. Subjective, irrelevant questions are typically not asked. So again, there's not a right or wrong, there's a preference. My preference is constantly structured. Now, I'm just curious, in the group here, does everyone use a job interview or a candidate interview form? Is there an interview form? Maybe it's kind of built right into your CRM. Maybe it's something that's on a Word document you open up when you interview candidates or you print it off. Does everyone use a structured candidate interview form? I do. I create them according to each role. Yes, that's what I always did, Natalia, is I created one according to the role. I mean, the basis were all the same, but there was always some varying. Okay, who else? I got lots of yeses, mostly yeses. Okay. And so even though we may be interviewing numerous candidates each week, it's also good to have that structure. Because one of the downfalls of doing something frequently is complacency. We can become complacent in what we do, and then we risk not asking the right things again, and we can miss vital information. There could be so much stuff that that candidate has that we don't ask, and then the client's like, that's not the right fit. And we don't think to go back to the candidate. We just assume, oh, okay, well, I guess they're not the right fit. But what if we didn't ask the most pertinent questions? Or the opposite, right? Maybe there's skeletons in the closet. Maybe there's things that we need to really understand that if we don't uncover those, they will get uncovered. And we don't want to have that situation. So having structure is always a good way to go. And this isn't a session to teach you on what should go in the interview form, but it's to iterate the fact that structure will always reap the most hopefully unbiased outcome, so that you are measuring people fairly. So basically, again, from the beginning, structure of that interview, this is just super basic stuff. This is really reminder, refresher, if we've kind of become complacent in the way that we're conducting our interview processes. But always setting an agenda. I always like to set up an agenda for the candidate as the interview is starting so that I can lay the foundation, tell them we've got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. I have a lot of questions to ask. The more concise and on point you are with the responses, the better. If I feel that we're going off track, I'm going to kind of reel us back into the conversation because we're on a time crunch, right? We all have those candidates who can talk and 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 talk. And then you realize at the end of 30 minutes, you learned nothing about the candidate. So trying to control that. Lots of open dialogue, opening questions, skills assessments, understanding how good are they at their skills, maybe some behavioral questions to even understand deeper, how good are they? What are they looking for, right? Obviously compensation. Maybe it's an opportunity for them for you to tell them about the role and sell the opportunity. Questions, closing, committing to next steps. So it's just like a client meeting, right? Whether we're having a client meeting, having a structure, knowing your process is good. Having a similar flow and structure. And if you haven't created a job or interview form, using something along these lines to help you with your structure. And then most frequently used types of questions that we're seeing more today. And I always liked to ask candidates both behavioral and situational questions, not only because it helps me understand them better, but it's because so many of our clients are using behavioral and situational style questions. They're not just reading off a resume anymore. Maybe some, but they're all fairly trained to ask deeper questions. And these are the hardest questions for our candidates to respond to. So I want to know, before I even put them in front of a client, how do they respond to behavioral? How am I going to coach them or help them before they meet my client based on how they fared in my interview with them? So I like to ask them these types of questions, about what have they done in the past? So behavioral is usually what have they done in the past? So tell me about a time when. And the best predictor of the future behavior is what they've done in the past. And again, hard questions for them to prepare for, hard questions for them to respond for. So if I'm not doing it in my own interview with them, I don't really know how they're going to succeed in front of my client. And I want to have some indication of what that might look like. You can send them a list of the famous 50 behavior questions, but asking some of these types of things depending on what's relevant for that role. And like Natalia, who mentioned that she customizes her interview forms based on the role, you can ask customized behavioral type questions that's relevant to that role that you might think would be important for them to be able to potentially respond to. Right? When have you had a difficult client? When have you had to solve a problem with no guidance? When have you had to persuade leadership? When have you gone above and beyond? When have you had a disagreement? When have you taken initiative? Things like that. So they tell me about a time when are the behavioral, and I want my candidates to be thinking about these as a reality of today's interviewing market. And these are, like I said, the hardest ones. So you want to get that ball rolling. They can start thinking about it. And we're not going to really go much into this. You all have the handouts here that you could always look into it a little bit more if you aren't familiar with the STAR method, but I always prepared my candidates for the STAR method. I would send them information about it before the interview. And I would just say, like, these are the things that you want to be keeping in mind when you're asked some questions, and prepare these in advance, think about what could come, and kind of walk them through that STAR, right? What was the situation, the task, the action, the result. And then the L is an extra, it's a bonus. It's what did you learn? Beverly, I'm not sure. That would be something that ACSESS, I believe, I would reach out to ACSESS for the answer to that. I'm not sure about that. So just something again too, how to break that down. And then another one would be the situational questions, which are even harder than behavioral questions, because now you're getting them to think about what would they do in the future. These are the trickiest for the candidates. So it's great that you use them when you meet them, but also really prepare them for when they meet your clients. And again, you can send them examples. So the situational interview is the client trying to visualize this person working for them. They're trying to visualize this candidate in a situation of what they would do, not behavioral, not what they already did as an example, but how would you handle this future scenario? So those are the future. And like I said, these are the hardest ones to respond to. So what would you do if you made a mistake that no one else noticed. Right? Maybe the company's been burned. Maybe there's been mistakes. Maybe there's too many mistakes. Maybe there's no attention to detail on their team, or little. What would you do if you were asked to perform a task you've never done before? How would you handle that? What would you do if an angry or dissatisfied customer confronted you? How would you resolve their concern? Right? So these are, like I said, difficult. So if you don't already have some of these behavioral situational questions built into your interview process with candidates, I would consider throwing a few in. And if that means you need to shave off maybe the less critical parts of your interview so that your interviews don't go too long, because again, not all candidates have, the time that we need, just like the clients. Hopefully the candidates are more amicable and amiable in that, but you want to think about, how can I start tying some of this in? Because it just gets them best prepared. It helps represent them well and helps represent you well in front of the clients. So now we're going to do a little bit of a quiz, and I'm hoping everybody will take part in this. And again, some of these types of questions that everything we're going through could end up on your exam for your CPC. So hopefully everyone is following along. But some questions I'm going to throw up here, and I want you to type into chat whether these are things that you can ask in an interview. And so either a simple yes or a simple no. And as I ask them, again, type in Y or N. And then if necessary, I will give some commentary on a couple of them. So let's ask questions. Can you ask these questions? Or can our clients ask these kinds of questions? So number one, yes or no. Are you a Canadian citizen? Are you a Canadian citizen? No, you cannot ask that. You can ask, are you authorized to work in Canada, or do you require sponsorship? But not, are you a Canadian citizen? What languages do you read, speak, or write fluently? Yes or no? Okay, yes. What days are you available to work, or any restrictions working on the weekend or on certain days? Okay, yes. Are you a member of a professional or trade group that is relevant to our industry? Okay, those are all yes. 5, how old are you, or when did you graduate from high school? I usually get a chuckle on that one from some people. So no, you can ask, are you over the age of 18? Hey, how much longer do you plan to work before you retire? It's a big no. You can ask, what are your long-term goals? How about, I see you worked at ACSESS. Do you know John Smith? Ah, interesting. Everyone is saying no. Okay. Oh, couple yeses, couple yeses. Okay. Oh, start off. So the answer is no. You can't. Are there any employees with ACSESS that would provide you with a favorable reference? So if you ask a candidate, do they know so-and-so, it automatically puts them on the defense. They're like, how do they know John Smith? Is this going to get back to John Smith? Can I trust you? Why do you know John Smith? Why are you asking those questions? So generally speaking, it would be a no. Have you worked or earned a degree under another name? Okay. Yeah, most of the yeses, and the answer is yes. You can ask that question. Do you have or plan to have children? Okay, it's a big no. You cannot ask that question. Can you get a babysitter on short notice for overtime travel? So the answer is no. You could ask, you'll be required to travel or work overtime on short notice. Will this be a problem for you? Who is your closest relative to notify in case of an emergency? Okay, so we had one no, and the answer is no. You can say, in case of an emergency, who should we notify? Again, in this question, you're assuming that they have a relative nearby. You're assuming that they would want a family member notified. So it's who would be an emergency contact, not relative. What do your parents do for a living? Okay, yeah, it's a big no. You could say, tell me about how you became interested in this industry. Are you vaccinated? So a lot of yeses, some say yes, no. The answer still is generally a no. The ideal response would be some hospitals, some employers have a vaccine policy. Are you comfortable with that? Right? If the company has a vaccine policy, are you comfortable with that? Are you yes, Colleen, are you comfortable disclosing your vaccination status? They could say yes or no. Okay, a few more. We've always had a man or a woman. Oh, whoops, that's the wrong one. Let me just go back. Okay, if you get pregnant, will you continue to work? And will you come back after maternity leave? That's a definite no. We've always had a man or a woman do this job. How do you think you'll stack up? Okay, a big no. Doesn't go with much explanation. Okay, have you ever been disciplined for your behavior at work? It actually is okay to ask that. Believe it or not, it is okay to ask that question. It's not considered a no. It can be asked. And it depends on the situation and I guess the nature of the work. Do you smoke or drink? So it's a no. You can say, again, if this is important for the clients, these should only be questions that if it's relevant, but these are also just good things to know about if a client is asking these kinds of questions. In the past, have you been disciplined for violating company policies, forbidding the use of alcohol or tobacco products? Are you able to reach items on a shelf that's 5 feet tall? If it's a bona fide occupational requirement that the individual need to be able to reach items on a shelf that's 5 feet tall, like if they're, then it would be yes, that's okay to ask. How about this? How much do you weigh? How about this? How many sick days did you take last year? Okay, the answer is no. You can say, how many days of work did you miss last year? Again, these are only questions if it's relevant to the role and the client is asking these types of questions. A couple more. Are you able to perform the specific duties of this position, or do you have any restrictions allowing you to perform the duties of the specific role? Yes, you can ask that. Are you able to perform the essential functions of this job with or without reasonable accommodations? Yes, you could ask that question. Are you able to start work at 8 a.m.? Are you willing to relocate? And last, have you ever been convicted of? So for which you, okay, so Alexander has the right answer here. For yes, you can't ask that. But what you can ask, have you ever been convicted of a criminal offense for when a pardon has not been granted? Okay, so the point in this is just wanting to inform you about some of these things and outline the how and what you could ask in certain scenarios. And I've had candidates who've been asked these questions from the clients, and maybe the clients just didn't know. They did not know any better. So some of the times we've had to have a conversation with a client and say, okay, it's an awkward conversation, but did you know there's certain questions that you can and can't ask? And these are the reasons why. So just a little bit of a fun kind of quiz activity to do for the group. And so
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
With the one that was asking about reaching 5 feet to get whatever, the shelf at 5 feet, or is there something in that situation, are the employers, yes or no, not supposed to not ask that? They can ask if there is, because of disability laws and stuff like that, is that still that you can ask that? Because are employers not supposed to, if necessary, if that person has all of the qualifications other than they would need to have some kind of help, like machinery or a cane or a ladder or whatever, that if it's reasonable, they have to provide that?
Yeah, so I think, and that's a good point, and maybe that question needs to be adjusted now. But again, it goes back to in that kind of example that Colleen put in the chat here is if it's a bona fide occupational requirement, depending on the nature of the job. So if it really, I guess it really, and maybe that went to, like, you're right, someone said maybe a stool. So you know, I probably should look a little bit more into that specific question if anything's changed around that. But at the end of the day, when it comes to those types of questions as examples, it really does go back to the reason for it. And if it's a bona fide occupational requirement, if the company, if the organization or the client has determined that it is a bona fide occupational requirement, that they need to be like easily without assistance able to do certain things, then I guess that one is a bit of a gray area. So I think you've picked on a good one, and I could look into that a little bit more. But at one point, that was considered a fair question to ask if it was a requirement of the job. I don't know if that answers that or not. Any questions? So when it comes to some roadblocks, things to keep in mind, it is a conundrum. That particular one too. So yeah, I'm going to go and I'm going to do a little bit of digging on that one and see if anything's changed in terms of the recommendation for that question. So when we take a look at some roadblocks, there's different examples that we may encounter that we always want to keep in mind. You know, again, it ain't done till it's done, until our candidates are happily placed and they're there and they've kind of worked past their guarantee periods and everyone's happy, or their contract has come to an end. But things that we're keeping in mind, that's just more of a reminder for ourselves that there's so many additional, in addition to everything that we're looking for, how do we identify candidates? How do we screen the candidates? How do we know if they're the right candidates? How do we match them to the client? How do we make sure that they're the best ones? How do we make sure that they've got 7 out of 10 and everything else that we're thinking about? We're also thinking about the fact that there's other factors that can derail the process for us, right? Other jobs that they've applied for. Maybe there's another job that they have a greater motivation towards, other jobs that they have yet to apply for, right? How many times have we had a candidate through the interview process, and then we find out through the interview process with a client that they've actually applied somewhere else in the meantime, and they got that client happened to move faster than our client, and they took that job. Maybe there's counteroffers. Maybe their contract got extended. Maybe there's restricted governance in their particular contracts, or maybe there's the nature of the work, right? Maybe the monthly pay, they're not sure about the way that the monthly pay is set up for those contracts. Maybe their notice periods get in the way, right? We find out at the end because we didn't ask the candidate what kind of notice period you need to provide. And then the client's like, well, I can't wait 5 weeks. Like, we need somebody in 2 weeks because of such and such. Personal situation, maybe visa requirements come into play, maybe the commute or the geography. After they've driven to our client site and they realize, geez, I really don't want to drive during rush hour there and back every day. Maybe the culture and environment just doesn't land with them well. Maybe they just don't like who they met. Maybe we find out, oh boy, you know what? I have a $15,000 bonus, but I need to be here for the next 3 months in order to claim that. That could be tricky. What about pension? We find out, well, they have pension, but where they're going doesn't provide pension, and they realize how golden a pension might be. Maybe the references are poor. We find out that there's those, quote unquote, skeletons in the closet, or things get uncovered. So there's so many factors that we can't forget about, that we don't want to dismiss or ignore. We have to keep so many things in mind. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, like I said, that clients don't truly often appreciate the amount that goes in behind. How do we bring these best people forward? So the last part of the presentation here, and just the shortest part of it, is just a reminder and just a mention on different testing, different sort of checks, references, things like that. And that it is a necessary, really necessary part of the selection process is the reference checking. And you really are, and we are doing ourselves a disservice if we're not interviewing candidates properly, but if we're not reference checking them, or if we're glossing over the references, or again, just not doing them at all. And so the points that we really want to be thinking about is, well, how do we, first of all, get the right references, specifically asking candidates for what we need. I don't know how many times I've had candidates send me reference checks or reference lists of all the wrong people. Well, no. I need, this is what I need. I need the managers that you've reported to. I need the supervisors that you reported to. And if you can't provide that because you've been currently employed at the same place for the last 15 years, how about someone who's left? How about somebody that you work closely with, someone that you put a lot of trust in? So giving the candidates specifically what you need, not just saying, please send me your reference checklist. I need to give them direction. I'm looking for employers, supervisors. I'm looking for a variety of things that are going to actually give our clients the right information. Not someone that you worked with 15 years ago that you haven't been in contact with. Relevant, timely references. And so when we're taking a look, we want to make sure that the candidates aren't misrepresenting themselves. Now, we know that they're always going to generally give us the best references and we're going to get great references, but it's still important for us to go through that process. It's one of the final steps to making a job offer for our candidates, and to make sure that we are giving our clients what we promised them, and that we are that liability. There is that liability. Again, we are that extension. We need to make certain that we're adhering to that. And if you have taken the course so far on ethics, business ethics in recruiting for your CPC, there's an example, case examples where reference checks went missed and serious allegations and serious situations surfaced where both the recruiting firm was sued by the company and the company lost a lot of money from some defraudulent activities. And the courts deemed them both responsible. So the recruiting firm had to dish out a lot of money because they did not conduct references. So not to say that we're always going to have an extreme situation like that, but it's the minimum that we should be promising our clients. And so reference checking, again, it's done for a variety of reasons. Number one, they expect that we're going to provide them good candidates who are legitimate, who are background reference checked, and that have hopefully been good candid references. And sometimes those hard hard to track down. But keep persevering, keep pushing those candidates to get you the best references that you can that will give the validity. I'm talking about not the best reference in the terms of the best person that they can find, but those who have supervisory experience with that person, managerial experience for that person, someone who they've worked close with that could speak to their actual skills and not just to their personality. And again, so just wanted to mention that part. And then just some employment testing. There's a variety of different types of employment testing that companies put their new hires through, or as they're hiring them. I know that we certainly do with our company, and our clients are just the same. And hiring can be time consuming. It's costly. It's a stressful experience for companies. And so quite often when they're putting them through different employment testing, it's to help them to weed out the candidates who may not fit on variety of criteria. And candidates might have an impressive resume. They may have interviewed exceptionally well. They may have nailed those situational behavioral questions, but they might end up falling short when it comes to performance because of mismatches between some of their traits and the job requirements. Now, my hope is that most companies don't rely solely 100% on these testing. Unfortunately, maybe some of you have had the same experience. I'd like to know in chat if you had. Unfortunately, over the years, I have had clients that live and breathed by these online assessments and only hired the candidates, regardless of their resume or their reference checks or their interview. If their profile didn't come out 100% favorable, they didn't proceed with them. It's a very frustrating situation, but that happens. But the reality is that these tests are here to stay. And so we need to understand what they are, and that we understand that it's just a part of the hiring process. And so there's different ones that our clients may use. There's ones that we may use. There's ones that our clients might ask us to administer ourselves. But there's different aptitude tests, personality tests, skills tests, physical ability tests, which again, those have to come with a bona fide occupational requirement. Different work samples, maybe in a creative role, they want to see an example of someone's marketing portfolio, different kinds of capability tests, all sorts of tests that are out there that we may be working for. And as I mentioned, again, BFOR, we're getting into the area where you need to be careful when it comes to medical or physical ability tests. And again, if the client requires that these be done, we need to know the why. We need to have that understanding, and we need to be able to help talk to the client about it as well and understand what is it for and how can we relay that back to the candidates and explain the why. And according to the Human Rights Code, to conduct a test of this nature, that bona fide requirement must be established, not just because the client says it needs to be established. And so that's something that that is critical. There could be different kinds of areas as an example, right? The police and fire service, they might have to undergo physical ability, or they do have to undergo physical ability tests, strength physical ability tests. Social service workers working in women's shelters, physical labor jobs having lifting requirements linked to minimum qualifications, maybe having lifting requirements for those own individual safety as well. Physical ability test could be a good predictor of performance, but also injury and accident rate. And again, being very careful, that recognition for this test, that if they don't have the BFOR, it can lead to discrimination. Drug testing generally in Canada is illegal. It can only be done after an incident. It can be done only after post-employment offer, depending. It does not, the Canadian Human Rights Commission does not allow pre-employment drug or alcohol testing. Okay, so again, it's a procedure used to defend a discriminatory employment practice or policy on the grounds that that policy or practice was adopted and in an honest and good faith belief that it was reasonably necessary to assure the efficient and economical performance of the job without endangering employees or the public. So I would put a star beside this in your booklets because this does come up. This is important when you're thinking about your exam. So pre-employment assessment benefits, there are benefits to it. Can BFOR can only be implemented after employment? No, the drug testing is from what my most recent knowledge is for the drug and alcohol testing can only be after they've received an offer of employment. So why? Why are companies doing this? Why do we do it? Right, to get to know candidates better, maybe it helps to screen faster. It can increase objectivity, it can recognize potential in candidates, it can raise red flags, it can reduce turnover, it can help avoid costly mistakes. Again, our organization, we do that when we interview in our company. We don't use it in a way that it's a yes or no or pass or fail. If anything, it's more of a how would we, what do we need to know about this person so that we can work with them, we can put them in the right positions, we can learn more about them. But in some instances, it will be a yes or no for our customers. But it's not a guarantee of fit. And it's just some aspects to the entire recruitment process. It should be one aspect of it, not the entire. And hopefully we can coach and work with our clients enough to understand that it's the whole picture that we're looking at, depending on what type of assessments that they might be looking for and the reason for it. So to summarize, there's just different sources of information that we're looking at, right, in this whole picture. So number one, it goes back to the beginning. It starts with the job order. Starts with that job qualification process and really understanding to the best of our ability what we need, how we need it, why we need it, where we're going to get it, so that we can get the right person to the client in the fastest possible way, but the right person. And all the different things that we're looking at to help us in our recruitment process, all the different sources that we have to find candidates, and then the selection process. So what's on the resume? What does our phone screen look like? What is the application form they might fill out for us or for a client? What are those tests and assessments? How do we interview them? Are we using a structured approach? Are we using an unstructured approach? Are we understanding our candidates' ability to respond to behavioral and situational questions? Do we understand their skills, but do we understand their capabilities of what makes them good at those skills? Do we know their motivations? Do they actually want this job? Do they have the right reasons for looking for change at this time? Right? What about those references? Are we getting references that are super outdated, or are we trying our best to get relevant references? Are we doing background checks that are required of us? Are we getting work samples in some situations where that might be relevant? Are there LinkedIn recommendations that we can highlight? What about have we placed that person before? Have we placed them before? How successful were those placements? What did the clients say about those candidates? So there's a lot of things that can help us to make an all-around decision. And once you've done your due diligence, you've gathered all the valuable information, right? So that it's more than just a resume and an interview in isolation. It's the whole picture that really helps us get to the best person in front of our clients. And again, if you are somebody on this call and you're selling your services to a client and you're explaining to the companies the value that you bring, think about all these things and talk about these things, right? So that the client understands we're not just trolling job boards and finding candidates, and we're not just trolling LinkedIn or just waiting for candidates to apply to us and hope we have the right one. Let me explain to you exactly what it takes for us to get you the people. And this is an example of the list. If you have this in front of you of the things that we do that qualifies our fee and justifies our fee in the work that we do, then again, maybe that will lead to trust from the client, and that they know with conviction that you're putting this job at the forefront and in importance. So we made it to the end, and with a few minutes to spare, I would love it if you can take your time to type into chat what your biggest takeaways are today. And again, whether you learned something new, whether it was a reminder, whether it was a refresher, please let me know what are some of the key things that you would like to adopt, bring back into your process, or bring newly into your process as you move forward. And you can type it into chat. Or if anybody feels it's easier to share directly, then by all means.